Good everyone, welcome back to our next edition of Econ Talks. Gareth, we've seen the latest inflation data out from Stats NZ this week. In a sense, not a bad headline result, coming at 4.0%, moderating from 4.7. It's now only double the Reserve Bank's sort of middle ground target, a lot better than 3.5 times as bad as you normally want to see it. But looking below that headline level, things start to go from looking quite good to maybe a little bit more concerning. It seems to be, again, one of those sort of domestically based pressures remaining far, far too strong. It's all of that international heavy lifting, which is great, but we haven't influenced it and also can turn around in an instant.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue. You look at headline inflation down from 6.7% rather to 4% over the last year. Non-tradable inflation, that domestic inflation, only down from 6.8 to 5.8%, and only slipping down 0.1 of a percentage point in the latest quarterly results. So that was a very disappointing number, and rightly so. The markets have been focusing on that and saying, well, there is still more pressure in the system. The Reserve Bank has been talking about their worries about domestic price pressures, about services costs, which they see as sort of hanging around for longer, as well as when you look over the next few months, there is still some pretty big price increases in the pipeline coming through for the likes of local government rates, where everybody seems to be talking about double digits. If you're lucky, it's under 20%, I think. Insurance costs, I got a house insurance update this week, and it was 33% higher than it was last year. I'm going shopping around to see if I can find anything better. And other utilities and energy costs as well. So there's some other stuff there's still in that system, which the Reserve Bank can't do much about them, but it's still got a responsibility to try and get headline and domestic inflation down and inflation expectations down. And that's the problem with those sort of big things that I've talked about. If they keep coming through, then expectations around inflation are going to be still holding above that sort of 3% level, not where the Reserve Bank wants them. That influences people's pricing behaviour. It influences people's sort of wage demands as well, even with the labour market softening. And so you run the risk that this sort of inflation just persists through the system for longer, and therefore the Reserve Bank, not saying they're going to have to raise rates again, but it does sort of bring into question the timeline about exactly when interest rates might be able to be cut.
Well, definitely. And I think, you look through some of those figures. Rents was the other big one that stood out to me. Another big component of inflation pressure at the moment, another big component of just general household spending. Rent increases running at, I think, the fastest since the 1990s. So again, a lot of pressure coming from there, and it's just all continuing to hit. You do have some of those sort of big thornier issues that are continuing to strike. But it is interesting when you think about what that means for the Reserve Bank. None of that data, when you look through it in detail, convinced me that there's any potential to lower interest rates particularly quickly. It's still too hot. But equally, nothing stood out and said, oh, we've absolutely, there is something burning far, far, far hotter than anyone had realised. It's time to, pull out the emergency fire extinguisher again. So sort of seems to be a continuation of not quite as good as expected or wanted to be. But not enough to sort of necessarily pull the fire alarm again. And I think, that's true if you look at a lot of components. And I think the worry probably for the Reserve Bank is that still with a weakening economy, with less spending going on and all of that, businesses are still putting through price increases and feeling like they can. Even construction, right? You saw that new building costs continue to increase, even though you've had a decline in consents of GFC magnitude. So it does seem to be one of those things where if I'm the Reserve Bank, I'm still worried that propensity to price increase at a much greater pace than before, the proportion of prices increasing, all of that's keeping me awake at night.
Yeah, that's right. And you look forward. I guess from the Reserve Bank's point of view, they've got to try and balance those issues with knowing that there is still some effect of the interest rate rises over the last couple of years to come through. We know that the effective mortgage rate is still pushing up gradually. People are rolling off lower fixed rates, and there are signs of household stress there. So, look, you come to the end of this year, maybe early 2025, and inflation might well still be sitting at around about 3%. The Reserve Bank has said they want to be confident that it's heading back to 2%. They're not worried about getting it in the target band. They want to hit the midpoint of the target. But for them, they have to realise, obviously, when they're setting their monetary policy in 6 or 9 months' time, that is going to take some time again to flow through and actually start to stimulate the economy or allow a bit more economic growth. So it is an interesting question that the sort of inflation numbers pose for them, particularly in tandem with just the general weakness of economic growth. I think what we're really seeing in those inflation numbers overall is just how difficult it is to get that last bit of inflation back in the bag once you've let the cat out. It just does get very difficult.
And look, I mean, that's something we've been talking about for a while, right? We've sort of said that, that last mile was always going to be the toughest. Very easy to shave off, from 7 percentage points down to something a bit lower, but not quite as easy to get it back in the target. So I agree. I do think it's going to take a while. And I think also for the Reserve Bank, when they're thinking through those decisions, they'll still be worried, like I said, about just how sort of intense those numbers look. They won't be happy enough yet. That's part of the reason that even before the inflation result, we at Infometrics would moved our pick right for an August cut now through to November. The Reserve Bank forecasts at least are still talking sort of early 2025, and it does sort of highlight or suggest that edge of caution around when those interest rate cuts might come through, just because there is that sort of uncertainty and things are not trending as quickly as anyone would hope. Again, not far enough away that the Reserve Bank feels it has to do a lot more, but equally not shifting them to do any different actions anytime soon. We'll assess how all of that goes, how inflation develops in the future, and what it means for the Reserve Bank, interest rates, and the wider economy on one of our future editions of Econ Talks.